Hi guys, this is Mrs. Gladstone reading Finding Zasha, Chapter 18. The snow crunched under our feet as Axel led us, not toward the center of town, but wandering through the village, carefully observing everything. At first he allowed the dogs to run free, then ordered one of his men to put them on leads. Neither Zasha nor Thor seemed happy with limits on their explorations. He didn't stop at any more houses, but talked often with his bodyguards and occasionally asked me a question. "Ivan, what is on the other side of this forest?" He pointed in the direction of the path Polina and I had taken on the day we went sledding, and I first met Petra. "I don't know, sir. We only just arrived, and I don't know the area that well." He continued to look around him. "Really? In my experience, 12-year-old boys know their surroundings better than most. I do know there's a hill not far away where I've gone sledding with my friend." "You see, you do know something. Tell me more." "About?" My heart jumped at every question. "This town, these people." He wanted to turn me into a collaborator when all I wanted to do was be a spy. "Many of them left for Moscow." "Moscow?" he repeated, as though he found it laughable. "Our troops are just 20 miles from Moscow now. And where did you live before you came to this charming village?" "Leningrad." "Ah, Leningrad." I hated hearing the word from his mouth, remembering all the needless suffering his people rained upon us. "You're lucky to be here. There's not much of it left, from what I hear." "But, sir, why has the city been targeted? It's full of women and children." He stopped walking and turned to me. His guards seemed like they were disturbed by his action, and of course they couldn't understand us because we were speaking Russian. "Never question me," he said sharply, the heat of anger beneath his words. "I don't care if all the people in buildings in Leningrad are destroyed. That is our objective." Those words assured me that I made the right decision to enter the enemy camp if I could help rid my country of our savage invaders. He didn't speak to me again until we were approaching the town square. The sight was amazing and frightening. Everywhere I looked was a tank or a troop truck, even 2 large artillery guns. If they had belonged to the Russian army, I would have done anything to get close to them and examine them. But these machines were here to kill us. And so I tried to memorize their details, their shapes, and their functions so I could give the information to Petra. I noticed that all the men we passed saluted Axel quickly when they saw him. There was something else in their response. Fear. He wasn't just the officer in charge, a man of authority and power. I'd sensed cruelty in him only minutes after meeting him. The soldiers unwittingly confirmed it. The Germans had occupied what looked like the largest building in the town for their headquarters. It was the 2-story brick building painted yellow that Polina had showed me, the one that she said we'd explore soon, and it hummed with activity. I was at a terrible disadvantage not being able to speak German. For what I could observe, most of the rooms or former offices had been turned into sleeping quarters for the soldiers, while others had the look of command centers with tables, desks, and chairs. The sight of Zasha and Thor brought smiles to the faces of almost everyone we passed. Many of the men glanced at me curiously or with confusion or even hostility. Maybe not only because I was Russian, but because I wasn't being treated as a prisoner. The men exuded confidence and a sense of superiority, and why wouldn't they feel that way? I asked myself. So far they were the winners, conquering almost everything they'd set their sights on. They also had been well fed, well cared for. That look I'd noted in the soldiers with Axel. These men were not to be underestimated. Finally, we entered what I assumed was Axel's command center, if only because it was the biggest room we'd seen. One of the guards helped Axel with his coat and pulled out a chair for him behind a large desk. He quickly began to sift through a stack of papers laid out in front of him. I stood near the door and watched, trying not to get in anyone's way or do anything wrong. A makeshift bed of blankets had been created for Thor and Zasha in the corner. They settled themselves in the blankets, pawing them first into a more comfortable arrangement. Already my ears were tired of the harsh tones of German, my spirit jarred by the sight of Nazi uniforms and insignias. This was the belly of the beast, and I had purposefully taken up residence right here. I started to feel the kind of fear I had before I crossed Lake Ladoga, that I might die before I had a chance to grow up. "Ivan," I flinched. "Yes, sir?" "Play." I took my concertina out of its case and slipped my hands through the straps. I already picked out the songs I would play him, beginning with a Ukrainian melody for the janitor of our apartment building had taught me. As I played those first chords, I could feel myself back in the basement of our building in Leningrad, watching and listening as he instructed me. I reminded myself that we each had our own way of fighting our enemy. My mother's was to work in a factory that made tanks. Auntie's was to take responsibility for someone else's son and to help the partisans. Petra, Galina, Yeshka, and Polina had committed themselves to being secret citizen soldiers. I played my concertina for a Nazi officer and hoped to learn something useful. I played off and on for most of the afternoon, responding to Axel's terse stop or play as he wished. Just 2 guards stayed with him, but they were vigilant. One was posted outside the door, the other one watched every person who entered for every second they were there, and monitored activity in the streets when they were gone. If someone did manage to make his way into the room to harm Axel, he'd be dead before he reached his target. When dinner time came, I was told by Axel to stay put and watch the dogs. As hungry as I was, I couldn't have been happier. I sat down next to the dozing puppies. Zasha rolled on her back, and I petted her tummy. I swear her face shone with some kind of light from deep inside her. She had what Auntie would have called an old soul. Her face and chest were covered in golden fur, perfectly accented by black fur around her mouth, in a little widow's peak on her head, and around her eyes. Thor managed to wriggle himself between me and Zasha to receive his share of attention. It was easy to tell them apart. The fur on Thor's muzzle and face was black, all the way to the tips of his ears. One ear stood at attention, and the other flopped softly down. In spite of my surroundings, I laughed and was filled with a kind of peace. For the next 20 minutes, I played with them in their bed, rolling around with them, scratching them behind their ears, petting them in long strokes from head to tail. We were lying together contentedly when the doors opened. The dogs and I sat up immediately, although I'm sure they didn't share the fear that filled me. Holding 2 bowls of food in his hand, a man with a white apron over his uniform entered the room and kicked the door closed behind him. To my surprise, he smiled and spoke to me in German as he set the bowls down for the dogs. He talked sweetly to them as they ate. "I'm sorry, I don't speak German," I said to him in Russian. "Fritzi," he said, patting his chest. Relieved, I did the same. "Ivan." "Good, good," he said in Russian. "You speak Russian?" "Little bits." "Good doggies, huh?" he asked, motioning toward them. Thor had finished his meal and was making an effort to eat some of Zasha's. She deftly moved her body to keep him at bay while she finished. "Good doggies," I concurred. Concurred, meaning agreed. Fritz frowned as he looked around the room. "No watering?" "No," I said, having noticed there were no water bowls, but not yet bold enough to bring it to Axel's attention. "Ah," he sighed, "I'm getting." He disappeared, but was soon back with bowls of water for the thirsty dogs, who drank deeply from them. After Fritzie left, the dogs seemed content to rest. We cuddled together in their nest of blankets on the floor and fell asleep. I was awakened by the sound of Axel arguing with someone. The room quickly filled with bodyguards and other soldiers. The dogs ran to Axel. His ranting stopped temporarily as he bent over to pet them and pick up Zasha, then started up again. It was then that he noticed me in the corner. "What are you doing in the dog's bed?" He sounded annoyed. I stood up. I'm sorry, sir. We were taking a nap together. After their dinner," I added, hoping he'd remembered I hadn't eaten. He didn't. The door opened, and still speaking Russian, he said, "Now what?" A soldier brought him a letter, which he read as he put Zasha down. The soldier remained at attention. Axel threw the letter down on the desk and looked furious. He snapped at the soldier, who promptly left, and I noticed the guards exchanging glances. Axel seemed like one of those volatile people whom those around him had to cater to or risk being his next target. Volatile means kind of like explosive. When 2 more people came to see him a few minutes later, he pushed Zasha and Thor away from him in irritation. "Ivan, take care of these dogs, for goodness sake." I jumped up, and I tried to corral the puppies over by their bed, but they were restless, and I thought I knew why. "Sir, may I take the dogs outside to do their business?" "Go, and don't you dare let them get away from you." I clipped the leads that the German soldier had been using onto their collars and went out to the hall. I remembered where the side entrance was, where we come in earlier, and went that way. No one asked me any questions or tried to stop me. After we'd left the building and were halfway down the stairs, I heard a dreadful, loud torrent of German that I knew was aimed at me. I stopped instantly. A soldier rushed at me from the sidewalk, his rifle up and ready to fire. 3 more soldiers came running to help him. I raised my hands, a lead still in each one. The dogs pulled to go forward. Axel Recht, I said as loudly and clearly as I could, hoping they'd understand that I was there with his permission. Axel Recht. The soldier stepped closer, speaking to me in German. Russian, I said. I'm Russian. I don't speak German. He gave a command to one of the other soldiers, who ran toward me and grabbed the leads from my hands. I closed my eyes, afraid he might hit me, but the blow never came. When I opened my eyes, the soldier with the rifle was yelling at me again, making a twirling motion with his hand, indicating I should turn around. Keeping my hands in the air, I turned and walked back towards Axel's office. I could hear the tap of the dog's nails on the hard floor, and I knew they were close behind us. It gave me comfort to know that I hadn't been separated from them. The guard outside of Axel's room showed no indication that he recognized me. In fact, I thought I saw a hint of a smile as if he found my predicament amusing. He knocked on the door, opened it, and in we went. There was a quick exchange in German, with Axel's temper soon on display. I could practically feel the guard, who'd stopped me, shrinking in front of his tongue-lashing. Thor took the opportunity to relieve himself on the leg of Axel's desk. Axel's face became flushed with anger, and he raced around to pick up Thor. He never stopped yelling at the soldier, and when Thor continued to urinate after Axel picked him up, I thought his head would explode. Ivan, get something to clean this up, now! Oh, my boots! For a moment, I was afraid that he would hurl Thor across the room. I've got him, I cried, reaching over to take the dog from his hands. Where can I find soaps, rags, and water? Do I look like a janitor? He shouted. Go to the basement. Find Fritzy. I ran out and down the nearest flight of stairs to the basement. Thor still in my arms. At the other end of the hall, there was activity of some sort. I ran toward it. It turned out to be a cafeteria or a dining room of some sort. A half-dozen men in white aprons were cleaning the tables and putting food away. Fritzy stood in front of a stove, talking to another man. Fritzy, I called out and ran toward him. Ah, Thor, Ivan, he said in greeting. Axel needs towel, soap, water for me to clean up after the dog. Bathing? No, bathroom. Thor went to the bathroom. Minutes later, I was on my knees cleaning up Thor's mess. Only Axel and the bodyguards remained. Those soldiers thought you were trying to steal my dogs, he told me with a dismissive laugh as he stared out of an open window and lit a cigarette. After a pause, he added, I'd put you in one of our uniforms, but you're too small. The thought of wearing a German uniform was repellent. That means, he couldn't stand the idea of it. Axel sat down at his desk. I'll write a note on my stationery. If you're stopped again, show it to the soldiers. Once I was sure the floor and desk were spotless and no odor remained, I stood in front of Axel. Shall I try to take the dogs out again, sir? Don't try, do it. He thrust a piece of paper toward me. I barely glanced at it, but saw it contained a short message handwritten in German. If you're stopped again, show this, and don't lose it because you won't get another. Yes, sir. I folded it carefully and put it in my shirt pocket. The dogs and I completed our walk without any problems, although we did receive a dirty look when we passed the soldier who had first stopped us. When we returned to Axel's room, Fritzy was collecting the blankets and bowls from the corner. I stopped, alarmed, not understanding what was happening. Fritzy saw us. Follow me, he said with a smile, and headed for the door. I turned to Axel. Sir? He didn't look up from his reading. You didn't think you were going to sleep in this room with me, did you? I think he did. No, sir, I answered, trying to hide the relief I felt as a chance to get away from him. Take your things. Do whatever Fritzy tells you. I got the dogs on their leads and took my belongings, saying thank you, good night, sir, and followed Fritzy out the door. What joy I felt in the hall, as if a 1,000-pound weight had been lifted from me. Zasha and Thor pulled hard on their leads to follow Fritzy. As we descended the stairs to the basement, I said, Fritzy, who's been taking care of the dogs? He shrugged. Soldiers. No one special? He shook his head. Only me. I cooking for them. 2 days. I've been curious about when the dogs arrived and why they were there in the first place. As pets for Axel, I knew groups of soldiers often kept stray dogs they found at the front as mascots and companions. But puppies, during active fighting, ones that looked like they were special, the best of the breed? If I could find the right moment, I'd ask Fritzy to tell me what he knew. The long corridor was lined with doors on either side. Opening, please, Fritzy said, pausing in front of one of them about halfway down. His hands were full with the dog's bowls and blankets. I opened it, but before he entered, he said, No, wrong. I peeked in. It looked like a storeroom full of brooms, mops, shovels, and buckets. Maybe next. We backtracked to the room behind it, and I rushed to open the door for him. Yes, new home, doggies. He set Zasha's food and water dishes on one side of the room and Thor's on the other. The back wall of the room was dominated by 2 metal desks with several layers of chairs piled on top of them. Fritzy arranged the blanket beds for the dogs under the cutout spaces in the middle of the desks, providing them with a protected, sheltered area. I made a little pantomime with a few words to show him I would be sleeping there too. Bed? I asked. Pillow? Blanket? Bed, he repeated and sort of shrugged, like that might be a hard order to fill. Pillow? Yes, no. Blanket? Yes. Thank you. I put my hand over my heart to show him how much I appreciated anything he could give me. Fritzy made another trip to fill the dogs' bowls with water and bring them a treat of bread and butter. He even managed to find an thick pad for me to use as a mattress. It was barely long enough, but would protect me from the cold floor. As Fritzy was saying goodnight to us, I told him I hadn't anything to eat since lunch. 10 minutes later, he brought me a dish of hot stew of bread and butter. He watched me eat it, laughing as Zasha and Thor demanded that I share it with them, and of course I did. After settling the dogs in their beds for the night, I lay in the dark, thinking of all the things that had happened in one day. Becoming a partisan and learning some of their secrets, preparing Galena's house for the German occupation of the town, Zasha coming to the front door, meeting Major Recht and his bodyguards, playing my concertina for them, being taken to the Nazi headquarters, being frightened to death when a soldier aimed his gun at me, and finding myself at the end of the day with the 2 most beautiful dogs in the world asleep in a storeroom. As I drifted off to sleep, I heard a sound like a moth fluttering its wings against a window, a gentle rhythmic tapping. My weary mind was still trying to place it when I realized it was the click of little nails against the hard floor. Zasha? Thor? I reached out in the darkness and felt the caress of fur in my fingers. I couldn't tell which of the dogs it was. Lifting my blanket, I said, "Okay, come here. You can sleep with me tonight." Without hesitation, the dog crawled under my blanket and settled against my abdomen, his tummy. As I was moving to make more space, I heard the telltale sound of another lonely puppy making its way toward us. "We're over here," I said with a laugh, reaching out to guide the dog. I knew immediately it was Thor, because he was bigger than the first one, who I now knew had to be Zasha. Thor found a place against my chest where he was comfortable, and I covered all 3 of us with the blanket. "Good night," I whispered. Oh, that's so sweet. Wow, what a day for Ivan. Okay, I can't wait to talk with you about it and continue reading. Bye for now.